I'm Aria Schwartz along with Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. The Indiana Fever. What's their roster situation, and what are the situations that they're facing? Let's dive in. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. Don't forget to see our amazing Steps written content over at winsidr.com and our sweet graphics over at Instagram at the Winsidr. Remember, downloading the episodes makes our stats look better and allows us to continue doing this important work. You want to sponsor an episode? You want to sponsor something regarding Winsidr? Email us info@winsidr.com. Rachel, another fun one for you. Somehow I feel like you got to pick the list of teams that we're doing first. The Indiana Fever, another hometown team for you in a very interesting situation. Very different than our first episode that we did of this, the Chicago Sky, because, well, this team is the exact polar opposite of the Chicago Sky in the sense of they are not coming off a championship. They're coming off like their fourth lottery season in a row. Maybe it's even more. I've lost count at this point. But let's do the same thing. I'll run down who's currently on the roster, and then we'll talk about cap space. All of this is, like I said in the last episode, general things. So yeah, we might be 10K, 20K off. This is also based on, thank you, hat tip, shout out to Her Hoop Stats for doing the good work that everyone in the W world needs to know, the salary cap and length of people's contracts. So shout out to Her Hoop Stats who's got that down. All right, let's do this. Let's dive in. Kelsey Mitchell, Jantel Lavender, Danielle Robinson, Tiffany Mitchell, Tierra McCowan, Kaiser Gondrzik, Aaliyah Wilson, Chelsea Perry has a training camp contract, and Florencia Changas, who I probably butchered that name, and I apologize. Blame Her Hoop Stats, who have this amazing aspect of it
So
that you
nice.
click on it and the player says their own name. It's lovely, except when they have a player like Florencia who doesn't have her name, and
Well,
now
you
I
put
look
an N
like
in
a
there.
fool.
There's
So
not an N.
thanks.
It's Chagas. Chagas? Chagas?
Oh,
But yeah,
yeah.
shout out
Well,
to Her
all
Hoop
right. I
Stats.
can't. I'm not a great reader. I'm a talker,
Shout
not
out
a
to Her
reader.
Hoop Stats.
Um,
That feature's awesome.
yeah, it really is. All right, enough shouting them out. I think 5 is the limit per episode. We have like a contract with them. We're not allowed to say their name more than 5 times in an episode. Um, okay, so here's the issue. All right, we look at their cap space. They got 431K left in their cap space. So yeah, they have a little bit of room. You can also draw, they have 4 protected veteran contracts. The max is 6. So they do have some wiggle room. But here's the crux of the issue, and why, if you're on WNBA social media, you've noticed that one of the GOATs of WNBA, one of the greatest players of all time in Tamika Catchings, has been, I don't want to say the butt of jokes, but been getting a lot of hate, a lot of heat for her in her new role with the Indiana Fever as the GM. And the reason she's getting heat is let me run this down. If I were to list for you Kelsey Mitchell, Jantel Lavender, Danielle Robinson, Tiffany Mitchell, Tierra McCowan, and let me pick one other, Kaiser Gondrzik, you wouldn't want over 300K of that to be going secured to Jantel Lavender and D-Rob. And that's not a knock against them. Get your bag, do your thing. Everyone knows that I have my own issues with D-Rob's playing style. I'm a big fan of Jantel Lavender in her playing style and her ability to impact a good team. But the problem here is, because of this situation, right? Normally, you can free up some cap space if you don't have that much by dropping some of these unprotected contracts. But the people who have unprotected contracts are your recent draft picks, players that you've invested a lot into draft pick wise and, player development wise in Tierra McCowan, who might be one of the best bigs in the league in
Yeah.
the next few years. You invested a lot in a high draft pick for Kaiser Gondrzik and Aaliyah Wilson. So, like, at the end of the day, you can't really drop those two players. So, yeah, Chelsea Perry, it's training camp contract, so it doesn't go towards the cap. Good move there. Uh, Chagas, I'm just saying haggis in my mind, but with a ch. Um, and she's a player you can drop also and bring in free up a little bit more cap space. But even with that, it doesn't even bring you up to 500K
Mhm.
in the cap space. So the issue they're going to have is just okay. You know, Alaman, I know that you were telling me before the episode. I didn't even know this. There was some news that came out about her. Whether or not she is going to be playing this coming season, unclear. Do they want to bring back a Victoria Vivian's, Bernadette Hattar, who are both reserve players? They also got Temi Fig Bentley. Um, and I always want to say Fig Bentley, like the car. And like, it's just one of those situations where, okay, based on who they have, if you're not gonna like Hatar is a great player for the cap space she's gonna take up,
Sure. I absolutely
right?
think they should bring back
Um,
Bernadette Hattar for sure.
Oh, and from like the small amount that we saw her, I know she missed out on some of the season, had to go back. Forget there was like a sickness in the family, or I think she was a little bit injured. Then there's sickness, and then rehab, whatever it was. The point is do like they're kind of similar to the Wings in the sense of like you've invested in these young players. So the question is, are you going to cut them loose? And we've seen what happens with low dwelling teams like the Wings and the Fever when they get in these situations. And this is where the questions start to arise about the front office people. When they've gotten to these situations and said, okay, we have these young players that we've invested in, but there's another, grass is always greener, another player coming across the horizon. And you start to think to yourself, okay, which of our two players we've invested in, which one of them are we going to drop so we can bring someone new in? Well, when you've done that, we've seen those players succeed elsewhere, right? So when you have those issues, and I'm blanking on the name, she went to Atlanta, then she went to New York, um, and she was just a standout player, but she was on Indiana for a little bit. Um, what is her name? Why am I blanking on her name? Rachel's just leaving me out hanging here, looking like a fool. Okay, Nigel Laney,
Yeah.
thank you. So like this is a situation where here's the other aspect that I know you want to get talking to. If you're a free agent, do you want to go to this team? What will your minutes look like? They can't offer you a crazy paycheck, and they can't offer you success. And as I always say, there's two things that drive player movement: money
Mhm.
and rings. And with the current situation of Indiana, you're not really getting the
Yeah.
best of either of those. What are your
I
thoughts about
mean,
Indiana?
my God, they're pretty set at the guard position. It's not a great situation. Not telling anyone who pays attention anything they don't know. I for the amount of question marks on this roster, and how can you get this team to be competitive? And obviously, yes, you have to invest in those top draft picks, and you've got to hope that this year is a successful draft for you as well. But my God, I mean, it's I don't know how Indiana's gonna turn this around. I don't know how you're going to attract a top tier free agent while being able to open up enough cap space and securing the other positions that you need to be able to do. I mean, that I'm just looking at it, from blanket outsider's perspective. That seems really difficult to do. And but that's the beauty of Tamika Catchings being in that role and selling a vision and selling an opportunity. I mean, God, we've seen. Maybe I'm holding on to the glory days a little too much, but man, the Fever used to be, like the franchise, or one of the top franchises. And so it's disheartening to see kind of where it's at. This is a huge free agency period, and this free agency period is handcuffed by last free agency period. It's like you're out here trying to make moves, but
Hmm.
you've got one hand tied behind your back, and that's extremely difficult. And there's a domino effect there. I like Bernadette Hattar. I think that from they've got to get deeper. They've got to have a little bit more depth in the post position. Um, Obviously McCowan has shown a lot of promise at times, but Hattar, that's a player that, like you said, you didn't see a lot from her last year. She played in what, 7 games, just 15 minutes a game during that time, but an efficient score. I think there's some promise there, and you can get her for cheap. and that's what this franchise has got to be looking at right now, is like, how can we put some pieces together that are up and coming and hungry enough to fit around these pieces that we already have secured here or protected. It's tough for me. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to attract a top tier free agent, and who would that be? I mean, let's just do hypotheticals. Like, is there a way?
What position? What position? Like, are we? You talked about the guard position showing depth and like kind of basically set whether or not we feel that's star power or not. But so like, if you put on your Tamika Catchings GM cap, which by the way, don't even get me started about Tamika Catchings just carried that franchise for so many years. But where are you looking? All right, I'm looking. I will list you names, right? But where are you looking? That kind of position
I think
wise,
you need to
bigs,
you
wings,
need to
guards, like
go
where are
get
you
one of
looking?
those like unicorn point fours, or point fives. Like I know that you've got to have a four that is a high level impact franchise player. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, imagine, hypothetically,
Yeah.
I know it's not going to happen, but imagine a Brianna Stewart on the Indiana Fever, and how much that just elevates the play of everyone else and takes all the pressure off of Kelsey Mitchell and all the pressure off of, playing on the interior with McCowan, or, like, they just don't have that type of hybrid modern day stretch for positionless unicorn long player that this everyone in the league, not everyone, but the top teams in this league have. And I think it's, again, if you want to say a position, it's at the four. It's not necessarily center, because I think you take care of that with McCowan, and then especially if you bring back Qatar, you've got some rim protection and just massive presence in there. I like that. But, a guard forward that is just something unlike the Fever have really had in recent years, quite honestly.
Well, magical world, perfect world. I'm going to list a few players that I'd like to see that I think fitting that position. Maybe, and again, right? Everybody wants that position. Everyone wants that magical unicorn. Everyone wants that, and I feel like the Dallas Wings are gonna hit us with like a fine for using that term, not referring to Satu. Um, but I feel like, and again, not that these are necessarily realistic, but that's an Emma Miesemann type player, right? Emma Miesemann's probably the one realistic, and by realistic I mean I look and I don't think Stewie is going to go to Indiana. I don't think Emma's going to go to Indiana. Don't get me wrong, but if you get a couple drinks in me and you tell me, well, Emma was really close with Marion in
Sure.
DC, and so and blah blah blah, and she wants to be a little bit more of a star and not just like a clog in the wheel. Fine. Another player that sticks out to me is Maisha Hines Allen, right? Do they kind of cut ties? Does Indiana cut ties to a few other players so they can just try and cash out Maisha and say, "Hey, we're going to give you this big money and a secured spot"? That's a possibility, and I would like that. And also, I'll say this: Maisha Hines Allen, very different style player. I get
Love her.
that, but reminds me of the banger days of Indiana Fever and the Elena Larkins, right? Like just fighter,
Oh, she's awesome.
hard nose, powerful player, almost for a football reference, like a linebacker who can also play defensive line. Like just that type of player who you're not going to move. And honestly, like pairing Maisha with Tierra would be ridiculous, and I would feel bad for any bigs going up against them because you're going to need a long ice
Mhm.
bath after that game. But honestly, just like looking at who else is available, there's really nobody.
Yeah.
Excuse me. There's really nobody else
Yeah.
that I can think of, right? Like maybe you try and throw a bunch of money at Diamond. She's you don't want her at 4, right? You're not playing her in that position. There's not really somebody else who
Yeah.
kind of fits that
Yeah.
style. I mean, unless
No, I
you're really
agree. I
gonna
think those.
out of
No,
left field John
right.
Crow.
I mean, which, yeah, I mean, it's tough. You're looking at this Indiana Fever roster, and you're trying to determine what is the number one move that this team can make, understanding they're handcuffed. And my God, I mean, and there's question marks with your recent draft picks, and kind of what does that future hold as well. I have no freaking clue. I have no idea. I
I mean,
you
yeah, no,
know?
I agree with you. I because you think about it, they don't have a lot of unless they like completely, as my grandma used to say, schmay dre, like just mix everything up, right? And do a ton of moves to the point where you're just confused about what actually is happening. I don't see a lot of moves. Maybe they can make one nice signing, but as you pointed out, how are you
Right,
convincing a player to
right.
join this
Yeah.
team?
I mean, and it's gotta be with money if that's the case. It's got to be with, an obscene amount of money, and the way this cap space is laid out right now, that's gonna be tough to formulate the rest of your roster. So, I think that they have the ability to make one nice move, but they're kind of invested in these protected veteran contracts and their youth. So you're trying to figure out what is that one nice move that you might potentially to be able to attract someone, cast a fairly wide net and have some conversations and see, what magic trick Tamika Catchings can make, luring someone there to Indiana. But it's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm just gonna throw this out there. If we're looking at players, because I'll be real, in my mind, if I'm a GM, no one's paying 155 for D Rob, no one's paying 175 for Lavender. Tiffany Mitchell, a player with a protected contract, making just shy of 150, is a player who I would look to
Sure.
move, right? Like, you've seen what she can do, and that's not a knock against her, but it's kind of, I don't want to say stale, but we've seen what she can do. It's not a it's not moving the needle enough. And if moving her can free up to get
Yeah, I agree.
somebody like a Maisha Hines Allen, like a Emma Meeseman, even if they're not going to be there every single season, I think it's something you got to seriously
I
consider.
agree.
And honestly, it just
I
frees up
agree.
your
And is,
life a
is
little.
someone willing to pick up that contract?
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm saying like 150 for Tiffany Mitchell isn't horrible. Right?
You're right.
Like
It's the most reasonable out of all of them
exactly.
to
Exactly.
move, to move, to move. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It also happens to be the least, but that's not what the point is. Any final thoughts on the Indiana Fever before we log off for today on this episode?
Um. Yeah. I hope that there's enough wine in my wine cooler to get through this.
It's going to be a long off season for the
Let's go
Fever.
Fever!
We'll be back.